Well, thank you for coming here. I don't know what happened. Something happened. Somebody's thing was canceled, but good to have you. I said if you were wandering around, that got Nancy. She was just out there lost.
That's right.
She didn't know what was going on. She said, but I think I should go in here. But I wanted to talk about Elijah this evening, this afternoon. Elijah, of course, is one of the great prophets in Israelite history. In fact, he's so significant that he's mentioned 29 times in the New Testament. So he's a very significant figure. And before I do that, I just want to remind you, something I hope you remember, is that the United Kingdom of Israel, it split at the death of King Solomon in 931 or 930 BC. And it splits into two, and you have the kingdom, northern kingdom is Israel, and the southern kingdom is Judah. And the wicked king Ahab, he was king of the northern kingdom of Israel from 874 BC to 853 BC. So I'm just trying to get in your mind the timing of when this is going on. And his wife, of course, was the notorious Jezebel. Now, Elijah first appears in Scripture in 1 Kings chapter 17, where he informs King Ahab. Let me hit the right button here. I turned it off. That's probably not good. How about that one? Okay. Where he informs King Ahab that for years there will be neither dew nor rain except by Elijah's word. And then the Lord immediately sends Elijah, he sends him away to hide near a brook east of the Jordan River. So wherever they met, he sends him, after he delivers that message, he sends him over here to hide. And this is where God, when Elijah's staying there, that's when God feeds him. Has the ravens, remember, bring him meat and bread. So I always get a kick out of people saying, no, how could that ever happen? I say, look, God is bringing. He's having these ravens bring him meat and bread. And then when the brook dries up, the Lord directs Elijah to go to Zarephath, you see up there. So he tells him, when that brook that he's been using for water dries up, he sends him to Zarephath, where he stays with a widow. And during that time, the widow's son dies, and that's when Elijah cries out to the Lord to raise the dead son. And God answers that prayer. And that child is raised. Then in 1 Kings chapter 18, it's the third year then of the absence of rain. So, they're not irrigating and stuff. They have no rain for 3 years. And so the drought is severe. Well, in the third year of the absence of the rain, the Lord directs Elijah to go and show himself to King Ahab. And on his way to do that, he meets Obadiah. Now, Obadiah is a servant of the Lord who happens to be in charge of Ahab's household. And we learned that Obadiah had previously hidden and fed 100 of the Lord's prophets during the time when Jezebel, Ahab's wife, was trying to have all of the prophets killed. And Ahab had sent, the way Elijah meets him, Ahab had sent Obadiah out to try to find grass, because the drought is so severe, to go to find grass to bring back so they could spare some of the horses and mules during this severe famine. And Elijah instructs Obadiah, he says, you go and tell King Ahab where I am and that I'd like to meet with him. But Obadiah, he knows that he's been looking for Elijah everywhere. And of course, if the Lord didn't want him to find him, he wasn't going to find him. But he knows that Ahab's been looking for him, and he's afraid. He's thinking, look, I will go tell Ahab, you're here and you want to meet, and by the time Ahab gets here, the Lord will have sent you somewhere else. You won't be here, and that will mean death for me. And so I don't like that. But Elijah assures him that that's not going to happen, and then Obadiah arranges the meeting. And when he sees Elijah, in chapter 18, verse 17, he says, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" Now he accuses Elijah of being the one who has brought the current suffering on Israel, as Achan brought trouble on Israel by taking for himself some of the devoted things from Jericho in Joshua chapter 7, especially 7:25. Indeed, Achan, he's called the troubler of Israel in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 7. Well, Elijah tells Ahab that he's got things backwards. He tells him he's got things backward. That he, Ahab, is the one responsible for the trouble that has befallen Israel. Because he's abandoned the commands of the Lord and followed the Baals. That means the various local manifestations of the pagan god Baal. So which is it? Which is it? Is the trouble due to Elijah's rejection of Baal, who, by the way, is understood to be the god of storm and rain, the god of abundant vegetation? So is the trouble that has befallen Israel, is it because Elijah has rejected the God who brings storm and rain and abundant vegetation, and he's no longer going to give it? Or is the trouble because Ahab has embraced Baal? That's the question. We have competing claims. Now, just as the identity of the troubler of Israel in Joshua chapter 7, that was settled in public before all of Israel. In 1 Kings 18:19, Elijah proposes a public identification of the real troubler, a test that will make clear once and for all who is the true God worthy of allegiance. Is it Yahweh or is it Baal? If it's Yahweh, well, then Elijah's charge against Ahab is correct. Ahab has brought trouble on Israel by worshiping the false god Baal. But if the true God is Baal, then Ahab's charge against Elijah is correct. Elijah has brought trouble on Israel by refusing to worship Baal. So this is how the thing is set up. And the proposed test, of course, is the famous event on Mount Carmel. You all know this. This famous event there where the 450 prophets of Baal, they call on Baal to burn up this bull that they have prepared for sacrifice. And nothing happens despite their prolonged, this goes on for hours and hours, and their frenetic appeals. They're just going crazy. And you remember Elijah even taunts them. Maybe he doesn't hear you. Maybe he's taking a bathroom break. He's taunting them as they're doing this kind of thing. But when Elijah, after having his sacrifice doused repeatedly with water, he has water poured all over. When he calls on Elijah, Yahweh, when he calls on Yahweh, Yahweh immediately, he sends fire that burns up everything. It burns up everything. It burns up the bull, the wood, the stones, the dust. It even licks up the water that had accumulated in the trench that he had dug around the altar. Now there could be no more definitive showing of the truth that Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that he is the true and living God. That's why in chapter 18, verse 39, all the people of Israel who had been gathered there, all the people there, they fell on their faces and they exclaimed, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord He is God. And with that, they seized the prophets of Baal, whom Elijah slaughtered, probably some directly, probably some indirectly by commanding the others to do so as well. But Elijah slaughters these prophets of Baal. And Elijah tells Ahab, who's allowed to survive for the moment, to go up and join in the post-sacrificial meal. And Elijah then goes to the top of Mount Carmel. And this is when he prays 7 times for rain. And the 7th time, you have the cloud that rises. And Elijah then dispatches his servant to Ahab. And he says, you go tell Ahab to head out now in his chariot before the rain makes it so he can't go. And so Ahab does that. Ahab heads out to Jezreel from Mount Carmel. He's going to Jezreel, but empowered by the Spirit, Elijah beats him to Jezreel running on foot. Okay, now that's all really background. That all brings me to what I wanted to talk about. Okay, so I had to kind of lay that out to what is the setting and what's going on. Now, having been an intimate and instrumental part of this tremendous miracle by which God delivered clear and unequivocal proof of his power and supremacy, by which he made absolutely certain that he and not Baal is to be worshipped. It seems Elijah expected this to be the death knell of Baal devotion in Israel. His perception seems to be this was the game changer. The people saw, Ahab saw, so no one thereafter reasonably could continue in the worship of Baal. Elijah fully anticipates a new day throughout the nation. Indeed, he runs ahead of Ahab to Jezreel, the city where Jezebel is located. The city where Jezebel is located, the arch promoter of Baal worship. In anticipating that new day, that wholesale change of the society, Elijah underestimated the tenacity of the enemy. And that was a mistake that rocked him spiritually. We read in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. So he goes to his wife. He tells her the whole show, all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, so may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. You see, rather than repenting, rather than allowing her heart to be changed by the report from her own husband of God's mind-blowing demonstration, she digs in. She digs in and swears to kill Elijah, to make him like one of the prophets that he had killed with the sword. Now, it's helpful. It's helpful to understand that opposition to God ultimately is not a matter of reason and evidence. That ultimately is not what it's about. It's a matter of the heart. Now, that's not to say that reason and evidence are useless, that they have no role in facilitating one's embrace of God. It's to say that unbelief can and will rationalize. It will be rationalized in the face of ample and even overwhelming reason and evidence to believe. You see, what Ahab reported to Jezebel, as clear and amazing as it was, that did not melt her opposition. You're thinking, this is crazy. Hey, you think that what's going to happen? That's it. Didn't melt it. She continued in it. Now, Jezebel's threat, it strikes fear into Elijah so that he fled for his life all the way down to Beersheba. Now, Ahab's king in Israel in the north. Beersheba is the lowest, the most southern town in Judah. So he's going all the way down. So her threat concerned him so much that he flees for his life all the way there. And then he leaves his servant there. And he then travels a day's journey beyond that into the wilderness, where he ends up sitting under a broom tree. And here in chapter 19, verse 4, he asks God to take his life. He says, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers." When he says, "It is enough," I mean, that expresses his weariness and his discouragement with the stubbornness of the opposition. He has reached the end of his emotional rope in fighting spiritual recalcitrance. And he has reached that end because the glorious experience on Mount Carmel created in him an expectation which Jezebel's response dashed. He is reacting to broken dreams of his own making, rather than accepting God's vision and finding contentment in being an instrument of that vision rather than his own. And he asked the Lord to take away his life because he's no better than his fathers. That expresses his sense of insignificance, his discouragement produced by the failure to have the impact he imagined. And I think all of us who serve God, deal with this in one way, shape, or form. It can seem that our efforts make no difference, that everything goes on just as it did before we served in whatever capacity it was that we thought would matter. We have our own visions of the impacts our efforts should make. And like Elijah, we can be rocked with a sense of insignificance when we measure their impact by our own vision. We can suffer the same thing. Well, Elijah, he goes to sleep under the broom tree, and he's awakened by an angel of the Lord who provides food and drink for him. He eats and drinks, and then he goes back to sleep. And after a time, the angel awakens him again with more food and drink, telling him, "For the journey is too great for you." Meaning the journey the Lord has planned for him is too far for him to go without some nourishment. The Lord is letting him know that he has more for him to do, even though Elijah thinks he has nothing else to contribute. He feels as though he has nothing else to contribute, that it's time for him to die. But however little Elijah values his life in terms of serving God. The Lord sees his life as useful, and it's the Lord's assessment of a person's life that matters. So God, he has a plan for refreshing and reviving Elijah's heart. And it involves Elijah traveling 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, the mountain on which hundreds of years earlier God had met with Moses for 40 days and 40 nights. This is a pilgrimage of sorts. It's a pilgrimage to the very foundation of the Israelite religion about which Elijah is in such deep despair. And while he's staying in a cave on the mountain, on Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, while he's staying in a cave there, the Lord asked him in chapter 19, verse 9, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He asked him that. Now, I don't think he's implying that Elijah is not supposed to be there. I think he's inviting Elijah to ponder God's purpose for bringing him there, to grasp what the Lord wants him to learn. And Elijah just pours out his discouragement. He's been committed to the Lord. But as he perceives things in his disheartened state, it's all for naught. He's been devoted and faithful. But it looks just like complete waste. Right? Israel has forsaken the covenant. It ignores the worship of Yahweh, has killed the other prophets of the Lord, so that only Elijah remains. And they're trying to kill him. I mean, it's a dire picture indeed, but a deeply inaccurate one. It is the perspective induced by the broken dreams of his own making. God tells Elijah in chapter 19, 11 to 13, to go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And the Lord passes by representationally. He passes by representationally as a rock-shattering wind. That's some wind. As an earthquake. And then a fire. These spectacular displays. But he was not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. In that there was no depiction of his being or verbal interaction with Elijah. And then there's the sound of a low whisper. You have these tremendous things, this rock-shattering wind, earthquake, fire. He's not in those. They are representations of him. And then you have this low whisper. And when Elijah heard that, he wraps his face in a cloak. This is out of respect for God's holiness and majesty. And he went to the entrance of the cave. And the voice says to him again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now you want him to say, "I'm here to have my perception reoriented. I'm here to realize that the God who works in spectacular things, like his mighty deeds in birthing the nation of Israel and his great display of power on Mount Carmel, this God also works in the seemingly insignificant ways. And he wants me to see that so that I might maintain my peace and joy in serving even when my labor seems like it does not make any difference." You want him to say that. That's why I'm here. But instead we get something like the dull reactions that Jesus gets from his disciples. He simply repeats the perception that has him so discouraged. He simply repeats it. And the Lord then brings the lesson home in 19:15-18 by telling Elijah to go back up north. So he's fled here. He tells him, let me get the map back. No map? Well, that's what you get. He tells him to go back up north. He's come south. And he says, go back up there and anoint Hazael to be king over Syria, Jehu to be king over Israel, and Elisha to be your successor as a prophet. And in this, God is indicating to Elijah that the problem of Israel's continuing apostasy, the very thing that has Elijah so dejected, is already on the divine drawing board. It's already on the drawing board. But he's going to address it in his own time frame and in his own way, not in Elijah's time frame and in Elijah's way. You see, these men, Hazael, Jehu, these men, years down the road, after Elijah is taken up, they will be instrumental in executing God's judgment. Elijah needs to leave the driving to God and play his role, whatever that role may be, drawing peace and joy from the fact that God will incorporate that role into the great work that he's doing. When I think about this, I'm reminded of N.T. Wright's illustration about laboring for the kingdom of God, where he presents the image of an 11th century stonemason, probably illiterate, working away on 1 or 2 blocks of stone according to orders that had been given to him. So here he is. He's just working away on this one piece of stone pursuant to orders. He isn't building the cathedral. He's building for the cathedral. When the master mason or the master architect gathers up all the small pieces of stone at which people have been working away, he will put them in to the great edifice that he has had in mind all along. So they're out here working and they don't see the vision. They don't know what's going on. They're just laboring at their little task. But the grand architect will use what they have done, even though they didn't understand it. He will use it in building his tremendous structure. And I see that's what God is trying to tell Elijah. That Elijah, you have to find contentment in this, in your faithfulness to the word. You are not big enough to do the driving. You have to trust me for that. And God also encourages Elijah in verse 18 by letting him know that at least 7,000 in Israel, there are at least 7,000 who had not succumbed to Baal worship. See, Elijah's perception that he was the only faithful one left, a perception that was born of the failure of his own expectations to materialize, that perception is declared to be a warped one. Things are not as he in his disappointment imagines them. Now, if nothing else, I want you to take away from this lesson the truth that the significance and the value of your labor in the Lord should not be judged by your own vision and expectation. God can take seemingly insignificant works and use them for His purposes and to His glory in ways that you cannot imagine. So focus on faithfully discharging whatever the Lord has given you to do, and find joy and peace and satisfaction in that, even when you can't see how it matters. God is weaving things together for His purposes. All right. So never give up, brothers and sisters. Never give up. Never grow so discouraged that you feel you have nothing to live for, nothing to contribute to God's work in this world. See, that's where the enemy wants you. He wants you under the broom tree asking to die. God wants you to be about faithful living, to do whatever He wants you to do, however unproductive and insignificant you may feel it is. That feeling that you have, that is an artifact of your limitation. That is not the reality of God. If we can help any of you, if you have any requests or any way that we can help you, let us know when we sing this last song.
Let's stand together. We'll sing verses 1, 3, and 5. Soldiers.
Hollywood. I just looked at one of those lights.
Is it in your eyes?
No, I looked down, that's why. I'm ruined. I won't be able to see these notes, and you guys will really be snoring.
There's something to it, Ashby. You said you looked down. You didn't look up.
That's right.
Rehearsing and nursing a part. We know every part by heart. Overture, curtain lights. This is it. We'll hit the heights. And oh, what heights.